My mother stood before my aunts and uncles, a champagne flute in her hand, and called me the family embarrassment. She mocked my life's work in front of everyone I loved. She thought I would crumble, but she had forgotten one crucial thing. I knew her darkest secret, and I was about to expose it. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The diagnosis was still ringing in my ears when I walked into my mother's 60th birthday party. Early-stage pneumonia, the doctor had said. You need to rest, Nora. No stress. His words felt like a cruel joke. Stress was the air I breathed in my family's atmosphere, and tonight's gathering was the eye of the storm. The grand ballroom of the country club was filled with the low hum of polite chatter and the clinking of glasses, a symphony of my mother's design. Every detail, from the ice sculptures to the string quartet, was a testament to her obsession with perfection and status. I felt small and frail, my chest tight with more than just the budding infection. I had spent a week in my workshop, painstakingly restoring a beautiful 18th century writing desk, pouring my soul into the delicate marquetry until my fingers were raw. It was my gift to her. But as I watched my mother, Alina, glide through the room in a gown that cost more than my first car, I knew my humble offering of reclaimed history would be seen as nothing more than old wood. My older sister, Layla, a cardiothoracic surgeon, stood by her side, the golden child, radiating success. My cousin Anthony, a chef who had just opened his second restaurant, gave me a warm, concerned look from across the room, but he was too far away to offer any real comfort. Then, the moment I had been dreading arrived. Great-Aunt Carol, a woman whose opinion my mother valued above all others, cornered me. "Nora, dear," she cooed, her eyes scanning my simple dress with faint disapproval. "Your mother tells me you're still tinkering with that old furniture, a little hobby to keep you busy." Before I could answer, my mother swept in, her smile as sharp as glass. "Oh, Carol, you're too kind to call it a hobby," she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed conversations. "It's my Nora's passion project. She's the family embarrassment, I'm afraid. While Layla is saving lives, Nora is saving junk." The laughter was light, but it sliced through me like a scalpel. My brother-in-law chuckled, my aunts shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word in my defense. My mother's gaze met mine, cold and triumphant. In that moment, the tightness in my chest had nothing to do with my illness. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The drive home was a blur of rain-streaked headlights and the hollow ache in my chest. I left the party without a single goodbye, the sound of my mother's mocking laughter echoing in my mind. Once inside my small apartment, the silence was a welcome relief. I collapsed onto my couch, the doctor's orders to rest feeling like an impossible command. How could I rest when every nerve was frayed, every part of me vibrating with a mixture of shame and a slow-burning anger? My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Layla. I ignored it. I knew what she would say, some variation of "you know how mom is," or "don't take it so personally." It was the family mantra, a way of absolving my mother of her cruelty. An hour later, the phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Nora," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth. "You caused quite a scene leaving like that. People were asking questions." I wasn't feeling well. I mumbled, my voice hoarse. "You're always not feeling well when there's a family function," she shot back. "It's just an excuse to be antisocial. Honestly, your behavior reflects poorly on me." There was no concern, no apology, just accusation. I listened as she went on about appearances and the importance of family unity, her words a series of perfectly crafted daggers. As I held the phone, my eyes drifted to the corner of my living room where the restored writing desk sat, shrouded in a protective blanket. It was meant to be her gift. Now it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. But as the familiar wave of despair washed over me, a different thought surfaced, sharp and clear. My mother could mock my work, my life, my very being. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had all forgotten about the desk. Not the one I had restored for her birthday, but the other one. The one that held the real family history. My mother, Alina, built her world on a foundation of pristine surfaces and public approval. A high-powered real estate agent in a city of old money, she didn't just sell luxury homes. She sold a lifestyle, an image of effortless perfection that she ruthlessly enforced within her own family. My entire life, I had been a scuff mark on her polished floor. My passion wasn't for law or medicine, the respectable professions my sister Layla had so dutifully adopted. I loved the stories held in old wood, the quiet dignity of a piece of furniture that had lived 100 lives. My small business, restoring antiques, was a source of deep personal fulfillment, but to my mother, it was a constant, public failure. I remembered being a little girl, proudly showing her a wobbly birdhouse I'd made from scraps. She'd smiled thinly and said, "That's nice, dear, but look at the perfect report card your sister brought home." Layla was the sun in my mother's solar system. I was a distant, irrelevant moon. I had poured my heart and savings into my education, apprenticing with one of the best restorers in the country, but none of it mattered. In my mother's eyes, I was a tradeswoman, working with my hands like a common laborer, a stark contrast to Layla, the brilliant surgeon who moved in circles a leaner could boast about at her country club luncheons. The primary antagonist in my life wasn't just my mother, it was her suffocating obsession with the family's image. She was the architect of my isolation. Her words at the party were just the latest, most public blow in a lifetime of quiet dismissals and cutting comparisons. She saw my passion as a personal affront, a deliberate rejection of the values she held dear. Her polished exterior and perfectly manicured nails were a suit of armor, hiding a deep-seated insecurity that I was only just beginning to understand. Her interest in my life was purely superficial, a box to be checked. She never once visited my workshop. She never asked about the history of the pieces I worked on. Her only concern was how my unconventional career would look to her influential friends. That night, her mockery had felt like the final verdict on my worth, but it was also a critical mistake on her part. She had pushed me too far, and in doing so, had reminded me of a family secret she had spent her entire life trying to keep buried. For 2 days after the party, I allowed myself to be a victim. I stayed in bed, nursing my fever and my wounded pride. The world felt muted, my passion for my work extinguished by the cold weight of my mother's words. But on the third morning, something shifted. I woke up not with a sense of defeat, but with a spark of defiance. I was tired of being her punching bag. I was tired of letting her define my worth. It was time to take action. I got out of bed, my movements slow but deliberate, and went to my workshop at the back of my apartment. There, under a dusty canvas sheet, was the piece of furniture that would become my secret weapon, my grandmother's old writing desk. It was a beautiful but neglected piece, its mahogany finish clouded with age. My mother had dismissed it as junk years ago when she was clearing out her childhood home, telling me to get rid of it. I had taken it, of course, knowing its sentimental value. But it held more than just sentiment. It held a secret. I had discovered it years ago by accident. While cleaning the desk, my finger had caught on a small, almost invisible seam in the back panel. A hidden spring latch. Inside was a false back, and behind it, a slim compartment filled with my grandmother's things. A stack of letters, a small, leather-bound journal, and several delicate, unsigned sketches of furniture designs that were both brilliant and far ahead of their time. The letters and journal told the story of a young woman with a fiery passion for carpentry and design, a dream she was forced to abandon when she married into a traditional family that expected her to be a wife and mother, nothing more. The person who had enforced this cruel ultimatum most fiercely was her own daughter, my mother, Elinor. This was my clever trap. This was the leverage I had forgotten I possessed. My mother had built her entire identity on a foundation of traditional family values and the pursuit of respectable professions. She had mocked me for the very passion that had been stolen from her own mother. The hypocrisy was staggering. My plan began to form, not out of a desire for petty revenge, but for a justice that had been denied for a generation. I would restore this desk not just to its former glory, but beyond it. I would bring my grandmother's hidden story to light. The first step was clear. I needed to understand the full context. I picked up the phone and called my gray-tant Carol, the very woman whose opinion my mother revered. I needed to know more about my grandmother's early life, and I had a feeling Carol would be more than willing to talk. A week later, I called my mother and Layla, my voice intentionally calm and steady. "I'd like you both to come over to my apartment," I said. "There's something I need to show you." My mother's response was predictable. "Nora, I'm incredibly busy. Can't this wait?" "No," I said, a newfound firmness in my tone. "It can't, it's about Grandma." The mention of her mother was enough to pique her interest. That evening, they arrived at my apartment, their expressions a mixture of impatience and curiosity. Layla looked around my small living space, which doubled as a showroom for my finished pieces, with a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. My mother, however, avoided looking at anything, as if my life's work might stain her expensive coat. I led them to the center of the room, where my grandmother's desk stood, now a masterpiece. The mahogany gleamed with a deep, warm luster, the brass handles polished to a brilliant shine. It was stunning, and for a moment, even my mother was speechless. "It's beautiful, Nora," Layla said, her voice soft with genuine admiration. My mother recovered quickly. "Yes, well, it's just an old desk. You've certainly kept yourself busy." "It's more than a desk," I said, my heart pounding. I walked over to it and pressed the hidden latch. The false back clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out the leather-bound journal and a handful of the sketches. I laid them on the polished surface. "This was Grandma's," I said, looking directly at my mother. "These were her designs. This was her passion." Layla picked up a sketch, her eyes wide with surprise. "I never knew she could draw like this." "She wanted to be a furniture maker," I explained, my voice level. "She had a scholarship to a design school in New York, but she turned it down." My mother's face had gone pale. "That's a ridiculous lie. My mother was a homemaker. She was perfectly happy." "Was she?" I pushed the journal towards her. "Her own words say otherwise." I had bookmarked the relevant page. My mother stared at it, her hand trembling slightly as she read the elegant script describing her heartbreak at being forced to give up her dreams. Her immediate reaction was exactly what I expected: denial and rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You invent this sordid little story to try and hurt me. You've always been jealous of your sister, and now you're trying to tarnish your grandmother's memory with your pathetic fantasies." The poorly executed threats were a confirmation. She wasn't angry because I was lying. She was terrified because I was telling the truth. My mother's desperate attempt to regain control came in the form of a family-wide smear campaign. She called relatives, painting me as a vindictive, unstable daughter who was making up lies to get attention. She claimed I was using my so-called skills to forge documents and desecrate a family heirloom. Some, steeped in years of my mother's influence, believed her. The family group chat became a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled accusations. Layla, caught in the middle, seemed torn. I could hear the doubt in her voice when she called me, urging me to just drop it for the sake of peace. "Nora, even if it's true, what's the point of dredging it all up now?" she asked, her loyalty clearly divided. But my investigation had already revealed the full, shocking extent of the deception. My conversation with Great-Aunt Carol had been illuminating. She remembered her sister, my grandmother, as a vibrant, creative spirit who was never quite the same after she got married. Carol confirmed the existence of the design school scholarship, and more importantly, told me who had been the most vocal opponent of her accepting it: Alina. "Your mother was a teenager then," Carol had sighed over the phone. She was mortified at the idea of her mother working with her hands. She said it was unladylike and common. That was the proof I needed. It wasn't just that my mother had been unsupportive. She had been the active agent in crushing her own mother's dreams. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I knew then that a private confrontation wouldn't be enough. The humiliation she had inflicted on me had been public, and so the truth had to be revealed in the same way. The opportunity presented itself in the form of the annual Family Foundation dinner, a charity event my mother chaired and considered the pinnacle of her social calendar. It was 2 weeks away. I called my cousin Anthony, the only person I knew I could trust completely. I told him everything. "I need your help," I said. "I'm going to present the desk at the charity auction, and I'm going to tell its story." Anthony didn't hesitate. "I'm in," he said. "It's time someone stood up to her." His unwavering support was the final piece I needed. The case was built, the stage was set, and my mother had no idea what was coming. She thought she was winning, isolating me with her lies, but I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the grandmother I never knew and for the truth that had been buried for far too long. The ballroom was even more opulent tea. Han it had been for my mother's birthday. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on the 200 guests, all members of the city's elite. My mother was in her element, presiding over the evening from the head table like a queen. She gave me a tight, dismissive smile as I took my seat, a look that said, "I'm glad you know your place." She had no idea that my place was at the very center of her carefully constructed world, which was about to come crashing down. When the time came for the charity auction, the auctioneer introduced the final, unlisted item. "A surprise donation," he announced, "a piece of local history with a remarkable story." On cue, 2 stagehands wheeled my grandmother's desk onto the stage. A hush fell over the room. The desk was a work of art, and it commanded attention. My mother froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. I saw a flicker of confusion, then panic in her eyes. I walked onto the stage and took the microphone. "This desk belonged to my grandmother," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "Many of you knew her as a gracious hostess and a pillar of her community, but very few of you knew who she truly was." I calmly recounted the story I had pieced together, of her incredible talent, her scholarship to a prestigious design school, and her secret portfolio of designs. I then gestured to the desk. "She designed this very piece when she was just 19 years old, but she was told that her passion was improper, that it was common and unladylike. She was forced to give up her dream by her own family." I let the words hang in the air before I delivered the final, devastating blow. I held up one of the letters. "This is a letter from the school, congratulating her on her acceptance. And this," I said, holding up the journal, "is her diary where she wrote about the heartbreak of being forced to turn it down by the person who claimed to love her most." I paused, and my eyes found my mother S. Her face was a mask of horror. "My mother ridiculed my career choice in front of many of you a few weeks ago," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power. "She called me the family embarrassment for choosing to work with my hands. What she failed to mention is that she was the one who bullied her own mother into abandoning the very same dream." A collective gasp went through the room. The public humiliation was absolute. Then Layla stood up. She walked to the stage, took the microphone from my hand, her eyes shining with tears. "Everything my sister said is true," she announced, her voice trembling but strong. "Our grandmother was a brilliant artist, and our mother's shame is not Nora's to carry." It was a decisive, triumphant act of loyalty that broke the spell of fear Alina had held over us for decades. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My mother's social standing, which she had so meticulously curated over a lifetime, crumbled in a single evening. The story of her hypocrisy spread like wildfire through her social circle. Donors to the family foundation pulled their funding, and she was quietly asked to step down as chairwoman. The public shaming was a consequence she couldn't charm or bully her way out of. She retreated into a self-imposed exile in her own home, refusing to answer calls from anyone, including Layla. The empire of appearances she had built was in ruins. A few days after the dinner, Layla and I sat in my workshop, the scent of sawdust and lemon oil filling the air. The auction desk was gone, sold for an astronomical sum to a local museum that wanted to feature it in an exhibit on local artisans, crediting my grandmother as the designer and me as the restorer. My grandmother finally had the recognition she deserved. "I'm so sorry, Nora," Layla said, her gaze fixed on a half-finished chair I was working on. "I'm sorry I never stood up for you. I was just afraid of her." "I know," I said, and I did. My mother's approval had been the currency in our family, and Layla had always been the wealthiest. "But you stood up when it mattered most." We talked for hours, really talked for the first time in years, dismantling the walls my mother had built between us. My cousin Anthony used his network in the city's art scene to further cement my grandmother's legacy and my own reputation. Commissions for my work flooded in. I was no longer just Nora, the family embarrassment tinkering with junk. I was Nora, the celebrated artisan who had uncovered a piece of our city's hidden history. My mother and I never truly reconciled. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too profound. But I found that I no longer needed her approval. My vindication wasn't in her defeat, but in my own triumph. I had found my voice, my strength, and a deeper connection to the passion that flowed through my veins, a legacy passed down from a grandmother I never knew but had finally been able to honor. My work, once a source of shame, was now my shield and my sea. Roan, I was at peace.